to Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. We are your messy, imperfect homeschool mom friends, and we're so happy you're here. I will add to messy and imperfect that today I'm a little sniffly. I think it's an allergy thing right now that we've got stuff changing here in the South. And so forgive my sniffles today. I sound a little different than normal. I feel like I can hear it. But anyway, my name is Meagan, and my amazing co-host is...
Hi, I'm Amanda.
Welcome. So our topic for today is what it looks like to set our kids up for success. And as parents in general, that feels pretty broad, right? And then as homeschooling parents who are also taking on the full weight of our kids' education, or the vast majority of the educational direction, that encompasses even more responsibility.
For sure. Many of us try to find ways to support our children without being helicopter parents, right? We know removing all obstacles and adversity from their path might feel like setting them up for success in that exact moment or with that specific scenario, but we also know it doesn't provide them with the tools they really need long term. So today we'll be exploring what does it look like for us to set them up for success, but still allow them to make mistakes in a safe way and environment.
Ooh, that's quite the balancing act, right? So specifically today, we'll be looking at the skills and emotions related to the frontal lobe of the brain. And those include things like planning, organizing, initiating, self-monitoring, controlling responses, managing time, paying attention, remembering details. I feel like this list is going downhill as I'm reading it. Like it's the number of, you're like, oh yeah, and multitasking.
Right, exactly. So if you listen to that list and thought, we have a lot of frustration points in that realm. So we've got you, right? We're in this together, I promise. But first, let's make sure we do our weekly recap, the whole keeping it real. What have you got going on, Meagan? It's been kind of a week. I feel like I say that every week.
I know.
It's been kind of a week for you.
I know. Yeah. It's been a little chaotic. So I haven't actually shared before on the podcast that our house is for sale. It has been for a while. And we just really haven't shared it publicly because, I don't know, it's going to open up a ton of questions and all that kind of stuff, right? We've moved a lot for my husband's job. And so every time it's like, where are you going this time? And blah, blah, blah. And this time has been a change of job for my husband. So it's even different than typical. And we're going to be moving out of the country, and it's going to be a whole different situation. So I've mentioned a couple of times throughout the podcast, just like, oh, my husband's out of the country for work and whatever. And that's like the permanent situation until the house sells. So, I mean, I have amazing kids. I have teenagers. One of them can drive. So that's a huge help and all that kind of stuff. But still, it's solo parenting on the extended period of time, right? So keeping the house clean, showings, dealing with realtors, paperwork, like all that kind of stuff. And then on top of it, you know, figuring out our plan for after this house and health insurance now that his job changed. And it's like, whew. And so, yeah, my weeks have been like, whew, right. And so, yeah, it's just been one of those, right? I think the highlight was last week when I texted Amanda. We had a showing last week that we were told like, oh, they saw it online, they love it, you know, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. And the bathroom fan was like a little bit wonky. It was like coming down out of the ceiling, and we tried to fix it and we couldn't. I was FaceTiming with my husband, and what do I do? And all this. And so he says somebody needs to fix it from below and somebody needs to fix it from the attic side. That's how it was installed. Okay, great. And so one kid went up there, and thankfully I have super hands-on, resourceful, amazing, like they're good. They can handle their shit. Like they're good. Right. But kiddo's foot missed one of the 2x4s up in the attic and came through the ceiling about 14 hours before this epic showing where the people were coming. And so it was a fun night. We stayed up. We drywalled the ceiling overnight. I said to the kids, I mean, we laughed so hard. Like I do have to give it to my kids. They're always up for a bit of chaos. And, you know, they kept like making jokes. And I was like, these are life skills. You're welcome. And they're like, I'm not sure at what point in life I'm going to need to drywall a ceiling at 2 a.m. And I was like, well, when you do, call me and thank me. Okay. Right. But we got it fixed. So, you know, I mean, it's going to be fixed again on Wednesday by a professional who knows what they're doing, but it was fixed for the showing, right? It looked good enough that if you didn't look at it. And here's the deal, right? Here's when you raise like really street smart kids that can think on their feet. my daughter says, you know what we need? It was in our primary bathroom. She says, we need a really big piece of artwork on that wall so that when people come in, their eyes go to the artwork and they don't look at the ceiling.
Look up.
And so I woke up my driving teenager and was like, I need you to go to Target and find something big and colorful to smack on that wall. And sure enough, and I was like, it was a great team effort. So it was funny because the next night I came out of my room, I was doing something, I came out at like 11 o'clock and I was like, what household project would we like to undertake tonight? And they all like cracked up. So you know what? It's chaos, but we're rolling with it. We're having fun and we're in it together and it's been awesome. But you know, it'll be nice when the house sells and we can move on too.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
It'll be good. How about you? How's your week been, Amanda?
You know, we've had a pretty easy week, really. We went to Huntington Beach at the end of last week. We stayed up there for a few nights. Kiddo had a beach cleanup event that we had signed up for his volunteer hours. He's working towards the Presidential Service, Volunteer Service Award, and some, I don't know, Mensa service project thing that they do. So, you know, getting in those volunteer hours when it's fun and easy. And it was a great day for it. Nice and cool day, nice breeze. The sun was out, but it wasn't hot. So that was great. And then there was a hotel up in Newport Beach that I had my eye on, like, oh, that might be a fun place to stay because they have, you know, the s'mores fire pits and shuffleboard and a
Yes.
slide at the pool. And there's an executive golf course range where, like, you know, you get to play golf for free and rent bikes to ride around the ecological preserve and just like all of these things on site. So we went ahead and booked and stayed there. And we've talked about this before, right? But we do a lot of like travel hacking kind of stuff. So we used points and all it cost us was the $40 a night for the self-parking fee, which is a great deal in Newport Beach if you've ever tried to book something in Newport Beach. So yeah, we just had a really good time. And then we got home and we had golf lesson and play date and just catching up. My biggest struggle was the fact that I had to like do reading. You know, we're recording a little earlier this week because I have a big board meeting later in the week. And so I was like, oh no, I've got to get all of the book club reading done earlier than normal. So yeah, things are rolling along. I'm not too sad about this week.
Yeah, nice. I like it. Good. You can recharge your batteries a little bit too, which is always good.
Right. That's it. Especially like board meeting weeks, like once a month I have this like big board meeting that runs at least 6 to 7 hours and it's really intense and people come and yell at me and accuse me of stealing money and I don't know, whatever else. So it's always nice to have a kind of easy roll into that. Right. So, all right. So with that out of the way, right, let's go ahead and get into it. So neither one of us professes to be neurologists. Okay. We are not brain scientists we don't get paid to do this, but we are going to jump into our topic today with a super, super high level overview of brain anatomy because it matters, right? So societally, we tend to think of kids maturing and launching into the world with various milestones. Maybe that's starting middle school or starting high school, getting their driver's license, going off to college. But the reality is the frontal lobe of the human brain doesn't fully mature until around the age of 25. I talk about this often in my home. 25, your brain is still growing and maturing well into your 20s, right? Like this is important to know. I think so many people just really don't know this. Your brain is still growing and maturing well into your 20s.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have only known this in the last couple of years when I on my parenting journey where I started looking into stuff and exploring and all of that, right? It's like, why didn't anybody even tell this to us about ourselves as young people so that we would maybe give ourselves a little bit more grace and forgiveness when we did really stupid shit. So yeah, right? So there's a portion of the frontal lobe called the prefrontal cortex. You can Google it, hit images, take a look, see where it is, all that kind of stuff. In addition to the skills and emotions we listed earlier, that section of the brain also controls things like weighing pros and cons, right? Which is tied directly into decision-making abilities. And so I think it's so interesting when we look at like, okay, yeah, 25, but when you think about the decisions that kids are asked to make before 25, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we have this whole thing going on in the United States with the college debt crisis and things like that, right? And it's like, people are like, well, they shouldn't have taken the money. These kids were 17 when adults in their lives told them to do this, right? They couldn't weigh pros and cons effectively at that age when they signed this all damning piece of paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's plenty of things. I mean, you can go to war without a fully formed frontal lobe and need to make those sort of decisions. It's pretty big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, exactly. So Dr. Angeline Stanislaw, I'm guessing we've discussed this. I'm terrible with names. I'm sorry, y'all. So she's the chief medical officer for the Missouri Department of Mental Health. She says, quote, decision making, logical thinking, and reasoning all take place in that frontal lobe. So this is something that the human brain can do that most other animal brains cannot, right? Like this is one of those things that sets us apart. But at the same time, it takes us longer. Evolution takes longer.
Did you just say evolution?
I did.
Oh my goodness, we are
I
those
know.
kind of homeschoolers,
I
right?
know.
Oh my, well, we've just lost the traditional homeschoolers there, Amanda. You've done it now.
I think we lost him a while ago, but okay.
All right. So throughout our journey as parents, there's some phases that are pretty infamous for having big feelings, right? Right. So I'm thinking terrible twos comes to mind, right? Everybody talks about the terrible twos, and then now people talk about it kind of bleeding into the threes now as well, right?
Yep, three-nagers. Yep.
Yeah, that's what it is. I was like, I know there's some sort of like cutesy saying for that. Three-nagers, that's what it is. The puberty days. And ironically, our current book club selection, we're starting a new book club this week, The Danish Way of Raising Teens, which if you're not raising teens, come anyway. It's applicable to all. But it talks in there about some of the psychological and hormonal changes of puberty and things like that, and how it all relates to behavior and communication and all of that. So, but all of this is related to the prefrontal cortex as well. So MIT's Young Adult Development Project explains that emotion and impulses are also controlled by this area of the brain.
Yes. So, all right, we mentioned all of this science to help explain why kids do things that sometimes have us shaking our heads. Okay. Yeah. We know we've taught them better, right? And still they make poor choices or act irrationally. But the thing is, it isn't exactly their fault. And it's often not by choice. Okay. So it's important to understand how this science all comes together.
Absolutely. All right, so another term that we hear thrown around often, I feel like more so these days than previously, is the term executive function. So if you've heard the term get thrown around, but you're like, what exactly is executive function, right? It's all woven into this concept that we're discussing today. So some examples of executive function that your kiddo may struggle with might be self-control, inhibitions, attention span. We see this all the time, right? How many comments I can't get my kids to sit down for more than 10 minutes, right? And or working memory. So even remembering to put on socks before they grab their shoes, right? I mean, sometimes you literally just look at your kids and you're like, what is happening inside that head of theirs, right? And so that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So you might be thinking, okay, but really, ladies, how much of an impact can this front lobe thing really have? Okay, well, so experts estimate that the frontal lobe makes up about 25 to 40% of the human brain's cerebral cortex. Okay, so now why such a big range? You know, as it turns out, the human brain doesn't actually have like borders around regions like countries on a map. So, you know, different studies define the boundaries differently. Regardless, that's a pretty big chunk of underdeveloped brain that is trying very hard to make good choices in a fast-paced, demanding world. And, you know, sometimes it doesn't matter how hard you try, it just doesn't work.
Exactly, right? So we do not profess to be perfect parents. We are not those kinds of podcasters, right? We follow some of them on social media and send each other the videos and with kind of the vomit emoji, like, this is so unbelievable, right? We are not those people. But in our experience, we've come up with some habits or techniques that have worked for us, right? That kind of smooth out some of the wrinkles on the parenting journey. And so that's what we'll be talking about a little bit more today. Before we do, we want to give a quick shout out to one of our amazing sponsors. And we want to tell you about this amazing new platform for homeschoolers called Recess. One of my kiddos uses it, loves it. Recess's mission is to help homeschoolers make friends and develop hard skills. They have a really interesting approach inspired by Maria Montessori and the MIT Media Lab.
Yeah, so here's how they do it. They meet your kid where they're at in their favorite games. And then in those games, they offer them harder and harder challenges to turn their interests into real skills. So everything they do is centered around kids being social together and, working together. Every class comes with a moderated chat so that your kids can talk to their friends outside of that dedicated class time.
Yes, absolutely. But probably the best part, or at least my favorite part of the process so far, has been their mission to understand every kid. So the teachers meet together and spend time really trying to understand what each kid needs and how they can help them grow. It's totally different from other class marketplaces or online classes that we've taken because there's more of a community feel at Recess.
So if your kids like making friends, right? Or helping them work on that skill and giving them a child-led education sounds interesting. Definitely check out their site at recess.gg. So it's recess.gg. Parents from amazing institutions like Harvard, MIT, Princeton, NVIDIA, Apple, and so many more trust their classes and are using this resource. So the quality is definitely up there. And really, at the end of the day, we're all just looking for quality resources that fit our kids and help them become the amazing humans that we know they're meant to be. And Recess just might be that resource for you and your family. So thank you to Recess for sponsoring this podcast. And definitely let us know in the comments or over email or in a DM what you thought of it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's jump in. Frontal lobe, here we go, right? So as we mentioned, we'll be sharing some of the things that we've implemented in our homes. These are tips where a little bit of preemptive thinking and some action help set clear expectations for both you and your kiddo, which we hope over time will minimize disappointment or some of the push and pull that many people experience on the regular. So the first kind of notation that I made is you need to know what you're dealing with. I read a post the other day with somebody who was like, oh, my kid's struggling with this, that, and the other thing. And they went through this whole thing and they were like, I think she might have ADHD. And they were looking for resources and suggestions. And my thing is like, if you think your kid might have ADHD, let's figure that out first, right? Like, let's at least know if that's what you're dealing with or if it's something else. So, neurodivergence, of course, we're talking about brain anatomy here today, right? So neurodivergence, we were talking about root words in our SAT episode with Wit, right? And my years of Latin that I was tortured with has to do with the brain. So figure out what you're working with, right? ADHD individuals can sometimes struggle with memory more than neurotypical individuals or people with a different wiring, right? So sometimes it could be because their brain has challenges to focus on capturing, organizing, and imprinting information because their brain's bouncing around a little bit more and it's a little bit disorganized sometimes, right? And this can lead to memory challenges that interfere with daily life. And so if you have an ADHD kiddo, it's just important to kind of level set that from the beginning, right? If you've watched Ted Lasso, there's a thing in there about how the goldfish has the shortest memory of any animal on Earth. And Ted Lasso has this whole inspiring thing about like be a goldfish. My super duper ADHD kiddo took that. And so his thing is that he is like a goldfish with amnesia. Like he's not even just a regular goldfish. He's a goldfish with amnesia. Like the child has almost no working memory, no long-term memory. Kind of stinks too, because we do a lot of travel and I'll be like, oh, you remember when we went to this really awesome place? And he's like, nope, like zero, and I'm like, right. But I have to know that about him when I'm working with him. And I always kind of use analogies towards other conditions or disease states that people don't poo-poo or downgrade, right? Like you would never say to a blind child or a visually impaired child, like, if you would just try harder to see, please, like, please, okay? Just try, right? But for some reason, when it comes to neurodivergence, that seems to be the message sometimes, is like, you just need to do it. Like, I'm sorry, but this is how the world works and you just need to do it. And so it's always kind of helps me to parallel that to something else. And if you wouldn't say that to somebody who has, a medical condition of another kind, it's not appropriate for your ADHD kid also.
Yeah,
So
that's it. If there's something wrong with one organ and you wouldn't expect them to change that organ, you should probably not expect them to change the other organ, which just so happens to be their brain, right?
exactly, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the starting point, is just like, as parents, to kind of accept that and understand that and know what's going on, so that you know what your starting point is. My kiddo will probably be a goldfish with amnesia forever. I mean, we can work on it and there might be small improvements and small gains to be made, but that's probably just how his brain is going to work forever, right? And that's okay.
Yeah.
So I need to know that, so that I don't have expectations that go against his biology and his physiology.
Right. That's it. And I think that's what this whole episode is really going to be about, right? A combination of strategies you can use to specifically help with executive functioning skills, help build them, develop them, practice them, hone them, improve them, but also being realistic about your expectations,
Yeah.
right? Like, it doesn't matter how much you try to teach someone something. If they can't fully grasp it, they will not, they're not going to become an NFL quarterback, right? Like, and that's okay. They don't have to be the best in their field, understanding where the limitations are and helping them get where they can be their best version of themselves, while not expecting them to somehow become an NFL quarterback, right? Like, there's a huge range in there between dropping the ball every time someone throws it at you and being the NFL quarterback. Let's find the middle ground. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, in our home and in my personal experience, like, lists are your friend, right? Whether that's making a daily to-do list. I've talked a lot about how we have a weekly check-off list. You can have one that's actual paper that you write on and you keep. You can laminate it. You can use wipe clean markers like Expo markers. You can get all the really fun wipe, dry wipe crayon things. They have tons of different colors, right? Like, you can do this whatever you want it to look like, however you want it to look like. And it can be words, it can be visual. So, like, one of the very first things that we started doing was I found pictures of all of the different breakfast things that I wanted my kiddo to eat for breakfast. And there was the Kodiak protein waffles with applesauce. And there was a picture, of instant oatmeal and all of these different things that he knew how to make or secure for himself. Or if he couldn't totally do it on his own, because he was a peanut at the time, he was only 5. If he needed a little bit of help, he could let me know. But I laminated that picture. I printed off a page with all of those pictures, laminated it, stuck it on our refrigerator door, and then would send him to go look at the list and decide what he was going to have for breakfast. And it empowered him to, instead of saying, well, what can I have for breakfast? Like, well, you have a list of all 10 suggested approved breakfast foods for weekday breakfasts. Go look at the list. If there's something you want and we're out of it, you're going to have to pick something else. But practicing that, like, you have the independence and the freedom, and here's a prompt to help you, right? That kind of thing can be hugely helpful. You can make the list with your kiddo as well, right? When in our home, I have a rule that if you're bored and you come to me and you say, I'm bored, my answer is going to be, I'm happy to give you some schoolwork to do. I'm happy to give you something educational. So to get around that, we created a list of things to do while you're bored. And we sat down and created it. He's big enough now, it's all words, but you could absolutely do pictures for this as well. And it has everything from puzzles to craft kits to writing a letter to a cousin or grandparent. And that list lives on a wall. And if he comes up, he will start to say, and it didn't start this way. It started with, I'm bored. And I would be like, well, you have a list, or I can give you something to do. Now he'll come up and he'll go, never mind. And he walks over to the list and looks at it and picks something to do, right? It's these kinds of skills, right? You're building on them. He's catching himself, right? His initial reaction is to be like, I'm bored, but he knows, right? He knows what's going to happen. He knows he's got a resource there to help him with it. And it's easy. We worked on it together. We update it whenever we need to. Super, super easy for everyone involved, right? Like how so much of this, like, oh, my kids are driving me crazy. My kids are so annoying. So much of it is that they need these kinds of prompts. Well, take some of that off of your plate in a way that actually helps empower them.
Yeah, because as you were talking, I was thinking like, I think it spirals even further too, then where people are like, and then they're so ungrateful. I took them to the science museum this morning, and then this afternoon they come to me and they say, I'm bored. I just took them to the science museum, right? And so they're both coming at it from two very different perspectives, right? The parent is like, I planned this thing. It was a mental load to plan this thing. I drove there. I paid for it. I packed snacks. Like, I get it. The parent's like, dude, I did my thing. Like, I would like some peace and quiet now for a little while.
I put my work in, you put yours.
Right. But then from the kids' perspective, like they didn't realize that was all that was on tap for the day. Right. And so they're like, well, what's next? I'm ready to go. I'm ready to do something else. Right. So it's like, and then the parent looks at the kid like, oh, they're so ungrateful. I put in this thing and they're still bored, and the reality is you're just on two separate pages, right? Like the kid's not ungrateful. They're not unreasonable to be bored. They need stimulation. They're looking for stuff to do. So having a tool that's available to them, and then you won't have that feeling of like, I do all this and they still want more from me, right? And it's like, well, they are always going to want more. That's just kind of how that process works, right? But like, if you've got some stuff stored up and on tap that they can mostly independently, depending on their age, kind of access and do, it takes that push and pull away from it, or it takes that like out of the afternoon when you get back from the science center.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I do that even for myself, right? I have a little box kind of next to the chair that I usually sit in, and it has snacks, sure, but it has an adult coloring book and a crossword puzzle and some cross stitch things and some things I can do for if I really just have some downtime and I don't want to sit on my phone or turn something on the TV, I have this assortment of things. I can be like, oh, that'll be fun. I'll do some coloring. I mean,
yeah, they're tiny humans, right? They're small variations of us. So the fact that their expectations are similar, but we don't acknowledge that sometimes because they're quote unquote kids, it's like, yeah, but they're still just small people, right? And so my next example kind of leans into what you were just saying about them just being humans, right? It's like, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we organize laundry in our house, but one of the things that I have kind of here is like making sure that your home is accessible to your children. Imagine living in your home and you can't access things, you can't find things, you can't reach things. Like you'd get frustrated over time, right? Of having all of these limitations that are there in the space where you're supposed to feel more comfortable, most at home, right? And so, making sure that things are accessible to our kids when they need them so that they're not always reliant upon us to reach something, open something, access something for them. So that note kind of dovetailed into my comment about laundry, because when my youngest started doing laundry for himself, he couldn't reach the little like soap dispenser and stuff to put soap into the washing machine. And so I just ordered on Amazon like a $15 collapsible plastic thing. He wasn't that far off. He was pretty close. So I just needed like a little collapsible step stool that I could slide next to the washing machine. And when he wanted to do laundry, he could pop that out and do it. The funny thing is he wanted to do laundry because he was upset that his older siblings got to do their own laundry. Like it was some sort of like gift that they had been given. And he was like, I would like my own laundry basket so that I can do my own laundry as well. And so we did that. Now, how did we start laundry? So I have 3 kids. They all function differently, right? They all need different supports and things like that. When he started doing laundry and when my oldest son started doing laundry, it was clear that we were going to need like a step-by-step list of how laundry is done. And so I broke it down as basic as it can possibly get. So I had read this book years ago about how to interact in a customer service environment. And I used to work in training in the corporate world, right? And so it was like part of that, where we would do these activities where you would pretend that an alien has just shown up on planet Earth, and you have to teach them how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? And, it would say something like, you'd have people acting it out, right? So it was like, okay, take your bread, right? And they would take like the whole loaf of bread. Like they didn't realize they needed to slice the bread or open the bag and get a slice out, right? And so it was like how to be super clear with your communication so that there's no miscommunication. And if somebody who's never been to Earth, never seen a peanut butter and jelly sandwich before can follow your instructions, then you've done it well, right? And so those are what my instructions for the washing machine looked like, right? It was like, it was, I mean, at the top it said washing machine, right? They look the same from the outside in a lot of ways if you're not used to doing laundry. So it was like, this one is the washing machine. Step 1, put the things in. Step 2, push the power button. Step 3, turn the knob to this. Step 4, put the soap into this level. Please don't put too much soap, right? Like all this kind of stuff. Making sure that we have a dryer sheet in the dryer, emptying the lint trap as part of the task to make sure our house doesn't burn down, like all these things, right? So, and I created those sheets, laminated them, and they got taped to the front of the washing machine. The one on the washer, one on the dryer, but making sure that we give them the skills that are necessary, because otherwise my kids are going to be walking around with their clothes static clung to their bodies looking like fools. And I'm going to be like, did you put a dryer sheet? And they're going to go, no, I forgot. And I'm going to be like, well, now you look ridiculous and you keep complaining that your clothes are zapping you, right? Okay, but I can't really get annoyed with them because their frontal lobe isn't fully formed. And so what does it take me one time to put a note on the machine that's just a checklist that they can run through at the end and go, did I do all the steps? I did all the steps. Okay, great. Right. And eventually it will become so second nature that they don't even look at it anymore. And hopefully their clothes aren't static clung to their body. But in the beginning, kind of having that tool there, I can take 10 minutes to create a tool, or in the corporate world, we would call it a job aid, right? Which is basically what it is. And then I have a smooth path going forward. Or I cannot do that. Expect my kids to have executive function skills that they physiologically might not have yet. And then we constantly have issues where the washing machine is spewing soap bubbles because they put a full scoop instead of a half a scoop, right? Stuff like that. So it just kind of makes sense to create those cheat sheets wherever they might live or wherever they might need to exist, and do it so that your kids have that, and let them know like there's nothing wrong with needing to consult the quote unquote job aid, right? Like it's there for a reason. I'm happy to create it for you. I mean, I always put clip art on mine to make them cute, so so yeah, go for it. It helps, right? I promise.
Well, yeah. And I mean, that idea of a job aid, right? My next point was cleaning their rooms. I don't know of any, I'm sure there's some parent out there who never gets frustrated with their kid for not cleaning their room. There's got to be someone out there.
I have one. I birthed, my daughter is like Monica from Friends reincarnated. Like and I'm not even like that. So I'm like, my mom, I think it came from my mom. But yeah, but I also have the opposite extreme. So I totally relate to what you're about to say.
Yeah, right. So cleaning your room is actually huge when it comes to executive function tasks.
Huge.
It takes a lot of them, and it's super, super easy to become overwhelmed and freeze and not do anything. So my kiddo took a class that talked about creating a roadmap. And this really worked for him. He liked it. And so if you have a younger kiddo, you might want to actually do a visual of a roadmap where you're stopping at each task. If not, it might just be a list, maybe a checklist or on a whiteboard, right? But it's super simple things. You're going to super break it down. You're going to start off by saying, number 1, put all the dirty clothes in the hamper. Number 2, put all the clean clothes away, right? Number 3, clean everything off of the bed. Number 4, put only the pillows and blankets and maybe stuffies back on the bed, right? Next, recycle or file any random papers. Put all of the books on the bookshelves. Find all of the Hot Wheels and put them in the Hot Wheel container or the Hot Wheel garage, right? Find all of the costumes and put them in the costume box. And it's these very, very specific tasks that it's like, oh, well, I can do that, right? Like, oh my God, my room is such a mess. I'll never get it clean. Becomes, well, I can find all of the Hot Wheels and put them away. I can find all of my stuffies and put them in the container in the corner, in the net hanging in the corner of the room, or whatever it is, right? And so if you break it down into these easy steps that are like, okay, I can do this, you're teaching them later on, right? That all big tasks can be broken down into small, manageable chunks. And life just gets so much easier. I know so many adults who would benefit from learning this at a young age, right? And learning how to do this as they grow. And once they turn 25 and their brain is mature, they have the skill. I know so many that do not have this skill, right?
Yes.
Like, teach them now. It's a great time.
Well, and it applies to schoolwork too. Like if they're doing a big research project or a science fair or something like that, right? Like it's the same concept as breaking it down into chunks. I remember when we lived in North Carolina, my now 12-year-old was much younger then, and his room was a catastrophe, like all the time. I mean, you'd be injured walking through it. And so my mom one day did exactly what you're saying, where she offered to go sit with him and kind of break things down. And she got there and he is standing there in the center of the room, just like so overwhelmed by all that was there. And at the time he couldn't do his THs yet. And he goes, where do I even put all these things? You know, and my mom was like, okay, well, we're going to go step by step. Now, the really interesting thing is he has now converted to being a clean room kid because he doesn't like that feeling of overwhelm. And so he'd rather do small tasks and keep his room tidy. And he'd rather purge things he no longer needs or uses to keep his room tidy. My oldest is still in that same position where when his room gets really, really bad, he will ask me if I can just come sit in his room while he cleans up, right? And I'll bring a book or something, or we'll chat or whatever, you know, or we'll put music on and just laugh. But he just needs, there's like a little emotional support of being able to kind of break those tasks down. And sometimes I'll just give him like one or two things to get started, where I'll be like, okay, let's start with dirty laundry. Like that's the start, right? And then he goes from there. So, but your idea of writing it down involves even less, you know, of me, you know, if I don't have that to give at some point in time, or I'm not there, right? It's a more sustainable long-term thing. So yeah, it'll be good.
Yeah, totally.
I like that. The next one that I wrote down was things to do with cooking and food and stuff like that. So for my youngest has ARFID, which is a severe food restrictive disorder. It's not like anorexia, it's more textural and sensitivity and things like that, right? It's fairly common with some of the other neurodivergencies. Not common, but it's there, right? It's out there. And I think there's a lot of people that are labeled quote unquote picky eaters that are far more than picky eaters, and we just don't really diagnose it well, you know? So food is a really big thing for him when we travel. Oh my gosh, the amount of food we have to bring. And he has a dedicated shelf in the pantry that's just his food that no one else is allowed to touch. Because if somebody doesn't realize and they eat the last of his thing, he can't just eat something else. He has a very limited selection. And yes, you can write comments all day long. We've done OT, we've done everything you could possibly imagine. The kid's been in feeding therapy for like his whole life basically, and this is where we are. So it's just what life looks like for us, right? But we have a handful of things that he can cook or bake for himself that he eats that are texturally appropriate, that work, right? And for his independence, I made him a little cookbook. And so it was funny because I was having a conversation with somebody one day and they were talking about how overwhelmed they are about keeping the house clean and organizing and shopping and cooking and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, you should get your kids involved with cooking, you know, like that would be great. She was like, oh, but I still have to be involved, you know, like I can't just like turn them loose. And her kids were a little bit older. It wasn't like they were going to burn the house down or cut a finger off, right? But she's like, I still have to be involved even when they're cooking. And so I was like, oh, hold on. This is an executive function disconnect where you can make this simpler for your kids, or you can make it more accessible for your kids. So the cookbook that I've made for my kiddo, I built it in Canva, and I add recipes to it as recipes become available to him as he kind of opens an opportunity to eat something different. But it's broken down ridiculously straightforward. Now, remember, he's a goldfish with amnesia. So he will look at a bowl and there will be liquids in that bowl. And he's like, okay, well, I can see the egg because there's a yolk, but did I put oil in or did I put water in? Right? He literally can't remember what he's just put in the bowl 2 minutes ago. So the first thing is all of his recipe pages go into a little plastic sheet protector type thing. And he's got one of those little dry erase type markers. And I put check marks next to all the ingredients so that as he pours something in, he's got a habit where he checks off the thing that he just put. And again, his memory might be his memory for life, right? And so having those skills available to him where he's like, yes, I put oil, check. It's kind of like if you use like an iron or a curling iron and you leave the house and you're like, I unplugged the iron, and you say it to yourself like 10 times over, right? So we've got that. And then the other thing is I just kind of break it down for him. If you're somebody who enjoys cooking or baking, like you're looking at a recipe, and I always tend to do like my dry ingredients first because I don't want to dirty my measuring cup and then I can't use it for dry ingredients once it's had oil in it or something like that, right? But recipes aren't always written that way, which has always kind of boggled my mind, right? And so I just order things that way for him, right? So that he, can use his measuring cups in a way that makes sense, use his spoons in a way that makes sense. One of his recipes is a twist on the Sneaky Chef's breakfast cookies, and I kind of tweaked them, A, for allergies, B, for texture, or C, for some added protein that I snuck in there with like chia seeds and stuff. So I've got that there, right? And all of the ingredients that went in there for the most part were divisible they all broke down into a quarter cup. So it might be like a quarter cup of this, a half a cup of that, a full cup of this. And so I literally just broke down the recipe where it says like, get a quarter cup. And now you're going to put 3 scoops of this, 2 scoops of that, 1 scoop of this, right? And so he can go through and he doesn't have to sit there. He's great at math, but it's one less bit of mental gymnastics that he has to do while his brain is trying to executive function really hard on the other end of something else, right? And so it's like, the process is as smooth as can be. I am not involved now. He's like, I think I'm in the mood for breakfast cookies. Great. And he can just go and get his thing out, get his little book, get his little Sharpie marker or his dry erase marker, and just buzz through those ingredients, right? And get that done. So I think sometimes it's like, if you thought, oh, I'll involve my kids in cooking, and it was an absolute freaking nightmare, like there's an opportunity to take a step back and go, okay, we got to figure this out, right? Like there's got to be a way to involve the kids in cooking where I'm not in tears. The kitchen doesn't look like a tornado has been through it at the end, right? Like what do those steps look like and what processes do you need to put into place? Because rather than abandon the effort or rather than continue to do it and be frustrated and annoyed every time, right? Like there's a process you can put into place to be their frontal lobe and to kind of help that process go so that they have it.
Yeah, I think cooking is a big one. I'm going to circle back to something you said just really quick. If you're listening to us and you're like, the idea of being able to mark off a recipe as you go is great, but I do not freaking have time to make a checklist or to redo this or that, you can look at your recipe card, right? If you have recipe cards, they are almost always the size that will fit in a photo album page. So you can buy some photo album pages, stick your recipe card in the 4x6 slot, and your kid can use their dry erase marker to mark off each thing as they put it in the bowl. And you didn't have to rewrite anything. You didn't have to get out your computer and make some kind of a checklist, something. Like there are ways around it that do the exact same thing and make your life a little bit easier and help them too, right? I don't know of a single kid who doesn't feel 10 feet tall when they successfully complete one of these things, right? They feel amazing when they're able to take something that they thought was beyond them, do the step-by-step tasks, complete it, and they're like, they feel so good about themselves. Give that to your kid. Give them the opportunity to do that. So now for me with cooking, my big thing is my kiddo's a little bit younger, right? So we're not quite to the point where Meagan is at with her kids doing all this amazing cooking stuff. I start small, right? Like really start small and build on it and don't expect perfection, right? The way my kiddo likes to make oatmeal is not, I'm like, please don't make me oatmeal. I love you. Please don't make me oatmeal. But he's happy with it, right? He has a way that he makes it. He likes it. He eats it. He's happy. And that is all that matters. And that was the first thing that I taught him to make for himself. Instant oatmeal in the microwave. We got one of those little fold-up stools. We got ours from Ross, which is a really cheap discount store. It lives in the kitchen. He needed it because we have a mounted microwave above the stove, right? And so he makes instant oatmeal. He started that when he was 5. And then the next thing he wanted to take on was eggs, right? And so we got him his own small pan and we got him his own set of silicone utensils to use to make sure that he didn't scrape anything or destroy anything. And he started with scrambled eggs. And again, that thing, like the first dozen, I'm going to say, were things that I'm like, if you are so proud of yourself and you're happy to eat that, and I am happy for you. No, thank you. I do not want an egg this morning. Right? But that's okay. They're learning, and that's the important part, right? And he went from scrambled to now he does over easy eggs because that's what his dad likes, and his dad also likes poached eggs, so he'll do a poached egg occasionally. Sometimes he still needs some help with that because a good poached egg is hard. Um, but like now he's 10 and he regularly makes Sunday morning breakfast for the whole family, right? Like he makes microwave bacon because that's what I prefer. I actually really like super crispy bacon, and you can get it really crispy in the microwave. And he makes muffins from a mix. And he regularly in the evening will do, like refrigerated cookie dough, chocolate chip cookies for the family while we're watching TV or something. Like, sure, I look forward to the day that he's making healthy, fresh meals completely from scratch with, all of these wonderful ingredients. I don't even have the energy to do that half of the time, right? More importantly, he's learning to cook for himself and for others. And he's 10. He's already learning how to make easy things from a box. And I know there's all of this stuff out there, and box food isn't great and it's full of other stuff. But the reality is, making food from a box and following those instructions, that is a freaking life skill that a shocking number of college kids don't have. Like the number of college kids who are like, I don't know how to make boxed macaroni and cheese. And you're like, but it's right there. Like, how do you not know? So like, it's okay. Give them the chance to start with these things. And yeah, you might have to compromise some of your ideals about exactly what you're eating or, what you're putting into your temple or, but it's steps, right? It's baby steps, it's life skills, and you're building on it, and they're getting better with each thing that they do. Each time they get better at it, they want to do more.
I was thinking when you said you might have to compromise, I was thinking you were going to say a little bit too on your standards, right? Because I think we talk about, so you and I are in a group chat with a whole bunch of other women, right? And we talk all the time about like, kind of the typical marital stuff, right? That all of us seem to have in common, or most of us seem to have in common in our relationships, right? And so one of the things that you see a lot of times, like on social media or like memes and stuff, where it's like, I'm overwhelmed and I need help. And then the husband helps, or your spouse or your partner helps. And then it's like, but not like that, like, And so it's like, I was thinking about it before, and then I just forgot when we kind of shift subject. But when you were talking about the steps for cleaning a bedroom, right? And it's like, put all the clothes in the drawer. Are they going to be neatly folded the way you want them to be? Probably not, right? But are they in the drawer? Yeah, right? And so you have got to step back and be like, great job, right? And then after that becomes like a really big habit, maybe eventually you're like, hey, I noticed your t-shirts are struggling to fit in there, right? I bet if we compacted them a little bit, you might, would you like me to show you a way to get them to fit in there differently, and if they say yes, maybe it'll come later, I mean, so it's interesting, like some of the things that I have thought about pushing over the years, like my oldest son like asked me to buy him something at the store not that long ago, and I was like, I called my mom and I was like, he asked for like such and such a thing, and I was like, if I had brought that up, it never would have happened, but if I just waited until he was like ready and asked me, yeah, okay, great, so you gotta kind of let go and let them do their thing, because if it has to be done to your standards from the beginning, right? I mean, remember too, like your kiddo's 10. Fine motor skills aren't even the same at that age, right? And so, or if you have an autistic kiddo, a lot of times fine motor skills are affected, right? Things like that. They are doing the best they can, right? In a lot of instances. And even if it's not the best they can and you're like, it could be done better. Okay, but did it fucking get done? Did you have to do it? So
and
how
much
what?
Does it matter?
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
How much does it matter, right?
Yeah.
So much of this too is about letting go of expectations.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. Before we move on, I want to quickly say you're listening to us, and we really appreciate that. So wherever you're listening, please leave a review, follow us, comment, like something, share something, engage, right? Like it all helps. It all helps our numbers, which helps our ability to continue podcasting, like bringing in sponsors and all of these different things. And even, like certain amounts of engagement and things like that actually help us get into the algorithms more. And if we get more likes and follows and reviews on podcast platforms, we're more likely to make it into their recommended list. So then we reach more people who are like, oh, I had no idea there was even a secular progressive homeschool podcast out there, because none of them are secular and progressive, right? So we really appreciate you. We try to make sure that we respond to every nice comment we get. If you leave a snarky, nasty comment, we're going to pretend like it's not there because you don't get to suck our energy. But we really try to make sure that we're engaged with everyone who engages with us. So please leave a review, follow, comment, like us, send us, forward it, share.
Shortly before podcasting, I sent Amanda a screenshot of a post in a group that I was in where somebody was upset because their Christian co-op's science was not meeting their levels of conspiracy theory, let's call it what it was, right? Like because it was teaching that the sun is the center of the universe. And so if you're in groups and you're like, oh, this is the homeschooling community, it's not, right? There's plenty of people that you can jive with in the homeschool community. So come hang with us, because I believe the sun is the center of the universe. I mean, I just, science is science. So I think, Amanda, do I speak for you? Is the sun the center of the universe?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So you found us.
Yeah.
You're in a safe place now. Okay. All right. So both of us have for our next suggestion are devices of some kind, right? Technology is your friend. I talked in our last episode about that we use smartwatches. I pay the $10 a month to Verizon so that they have service that goes to them. And the main reason for that would be like if my kids have an online class or something, they would be at the park playing Pokemon Go. And so if they're not connected to the house Wi-Fi, the alert telling them that they have a class in 20 minutes isn't going to help them. So for $10 a month, they have the watch. It's on their arm, right? And let me tell you, it has been a game changer. I do not have to remind my kids to show up to stuff on time. Most of what we do is a recurring event. And so it's been programmed one time. The alarms have been programmed one time, and it just happens. It has been like so freeing for me to slap a smartwatch on them and be like, have a great day. So can't recommend it enough.
Yeah. And so for us, it's a little bit different of a situation. One, because my kiddo is a little younger. Two, because we live in the city, and because he is younger, he's not going out on his own, doing a lot of things like that. And three, we live in a small space, right? We're in a 2-bedroom condo, and literally we have one large open living space and then the 2 bedrooms. And that's all she wrote. So we use smart home devices, right? For us specifically, it's an Alexa, but you can use Google Home or whatever you choose to use. And I just set up those same reminders in there to go every week at the same time. And, you just kind of set that at whatever time you need, whatever you figure out works for them. And it's that, like, one, it's a prompt for them. It's a reminder. And they need that. And that they need that. But how many of us are tired of feeling like we're always nagging the kids?
Yes.
Right. And the kids stop listening, right? Like, oh, she's just going to nag me about something else. Or, like, oh, yeah. Wait, what was it that you told me I needed to get to? Because it's like, oh, take it off your plate. Let Alexa be the nag.
And my favorite was before we came up with the system, right? This is what I'm talking about, like the aggravation and the push and pull and stuff like that. So in the old world, I would do a weekly calendar that I would print out, and it had everything on there, and it went on everybody's bedroom door. My parents had one. I had one. My husband had one. He legitimately never looked at it. He'd be like, what time is it? I'm like, I give you a calendar. And he's like, I don't look at it. So anyway, they'd be at the park playing Pokemon Go, and I'd be like, you missed your photography class. They'd get annoyed with me that I didn't remind. And I was like, I'm freaking busy. And I'm like, I can't remind you all the time. I made a calendar, I posted it. And so that's where I had to take a step back and be like, the calendar system is not working, right? Like, we need something else because they're missing stuff that I paid for. I'm pissed at them because they're blowing money, all this stuff. They're annoyed because they missed their class. They're disappointed. And I'm sure there's a piece of a lot of times the way people react to something is not the actual emotion that they're feeling. And so part of it is like, yeah, they come across as being annoyed that I forgot to remind them, quote unquote, right? But the reality is, it's probably like, there's probably a feeling in there that's like, oh crap, I forgot again, and she's going to be upset with me. And so the reaction comes out differently. It morphs, right? So I sat back and I was like, there's got to be a better system. And I laid in bed at night for like weeks, troubleshooting and Googling and asking other parents and all this kind of stuff before we finally found a system that works. So if your system isn't working, do something else. You're not stuck with that system, right?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the weekly calendar. I used to put inspirational quotes on it, and we'd have countdowns to big events and stuff like that, but it wasn't freaking working. So move on, right?
Yeah.
The next thing that I have on here, and I kind of talked a little bit about it a little while ago, as far as like making sure your home is accessible to your kids and making sure that they feel comfortable in your home, right? But also, I think that that same philosophy can apply towards plans, right?
Mm-hmm.
We sometimes, I think, have conversations as adults, or maybe as the planner of the house, if that is your task, right? That's certainly my job. I have conversations in my head, and then I feel like everybody just knows the plan because I've thought it through very thoroughly,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't know the plan. And then I'm annoyed that you're not ready to go on time, or that you're asking me questions about something that's so obvious, or something that I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
hold on, did you not know the plan? Like, did I not communicate the plan effectively? And so again, I feel like, imagine as an adult just living by the seat of your pants all the time, right? Like, you're not the planner. You never have any idea what's going on. Somebody just gives you, like, quote unquote, no notice to go do something. And you're just supposed to like snap it to gear and go do that thing, right? And be excited about it and be prepared for
Mm-hmm.
it and be on time for it and all that. And I think sometimes we do that to our kids because in our heads, we've got it all figured out, but we never actually communicated that to them or set expectations. Like, maybe you're going to an event that they've never been to before and they don't know what the dress code is, or if food is going to be served there, or if they should have eaten ahead of time, or something like that, right? So really making sure that they know what that is, what comes next, what the timelines are, things like that. I made a tragic mistake with my kids when they were younger, where I did some of the things that like my parents did with me that worked for me, but then I found didn't work for my kids. And that was a real doozy of a reality check, right? So I remember when I was a kid, my parents would just wake me up sometimes and be like, hey, we're getting on a plane today and we're going here, right? And I'd be like, cool, let's go, right? And it didn't bother me. It didn't affect me. And they would do that so that I didn't ask them questions for
Mm-hmm.
like weeks. Like, is today the day? Are we doing the thing? When are we going? And so like they
Mm-hmm.
just saved their own sanity by telling me that day, like they had planned it the night before, you know? And so I'm like, okay, so the first time we were going to go on some like big international trip, my kids were really small. I think they were like 2 and 1. And we were going to go to Dominican Republic for a big vacation, right? And I woke them up that morning. I'm like, hey, guess what, guys? Right? I did the thing. We go now. And I had brought for them all kinds of new beach toys and pool floaties and like stuff like that to take with them, right? We get there. We got there early enough in the day. It was an all-inclusive. There's beach, there's pool. It's amazing. We were staying in a family concierge suite where they literally come in at night with a silver tray with pillowcases on it that had like curious storage, and you got to pick your pillowcase, and they would bring milk and cookies to the kids in the room and stuff like that at night at bedtime. So it was like heaven on earth, right? We get there, we have like the best first day ever, and my kid was like, my oldest, who's I have learned does not like surprises, is an introvert, is a homebody, right? I didn't know that fully when he was 2 years old, right? He has a great day at the pool, loves it. And then that night he was like, and so now we go home? And I was like, no, we're staying here. He, the entire week, asked when to go home, like the whole week. And then I learned, like, because now, of course, now he's almost 17. Like, I know him much better now, right? I had brought all new beach toys. I had brought all new. He didn't have any comfort items. He didn't have anything he brought his stuffy, his favorite stuffy with him, who went everywhere with us. But then on top, so it was like I had like this domino effect of mistakes that I had made by just not knowing him as well as I do now, right? And so we got home. He was homesick the entire week. He was like, that was the worst vacation ever. I'm like, wow, I'm so glad we just spent all that money, right? So I learned I would literally go online after that whenever we would travel, and I would make him quote unquote travel brochures. It would take me 5 minutes. We're not talking high level graphic design here, right? We're talking like I would go grab a Google image of what the hotel looked like, a Google image of a beach, a Google image of a plane, right? And and for like a couple of weeks before we would travel, we would work that into one of our bedtime stories at night, where to be like, oh, let's look at our travel brochure. And then we would talk it through. And then we came up with a system where he got to pack a handful of comfort items, right? And some of them were so stupid, it was not even funny. Like one time he brought a toy accordion with him, and I was like, no one wants to hear that on vacation. But like, that was the rule. He could pick what, as long as it fit in the bag that I had designated for him for his comfort items, he could bring his comfort items, right? So after that, he always knew what the plan was, right? And so I wasn't throwing him for a loop and then just expecting him to like fall in line, and do that thing. And so that could even be true for like field trips and errands and all kinds of stuff. Like if you have a kid who doesn't shift on the fly, mine does not, like
Mhm.
at all. And that's just his personality. Like I said, he's almost 17. He's still not shifting on the fly. So, right,
Mhm.
know that about your kids and set them up for success, right? Like, what do you need to help prepare them so that they have a visual idea of what's coming? I mean, there are some adults who would be like, yeah, I'll sign up for a vacation tomorrow where I have no idea where I'm going, what I'm doing, where I'm staying, what I'm packing. But like most adults would not just be cool with that, right? And so, but we expect our kids to be, and some of them don't have that personality.
Yeah, for the record, I love the I've always dreamt of doing one of those vacations that like
Oh,
where like you get the envelope and it tells you that morning like what kind of clothes to pack and go to the airport, right? You don't actually know. I think that sounds so fun. But
well,
I
and I
know
think
most
that's
people are
yeah, I
not.
think that's why it didn't bother me. I mean, I specifically remember getting a call years ago. I was in my 20s, like, hey, a bunch of us are going surfing up in Vero Beach. You want to come? And I like threw a razor and a toothbrush and some deodorant and like a clean pair of panties in my purse and left to go to Vero Beach, like with nothing, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
I was fine with that, but
Hmm.
you know, my kid is not that person.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's my husband's 50% of the DNA. It's his fault. But, you know, I got to know that. And so I have to kind of work around it and make sure that he feels comfortable because this is his life too, you know?
Yeah. And another kind of taking that know the plan one step further, a really concrete executive functioning skill that a lot of people aren't taught because they don't even teach it in schools is the planning backwards, right? We, especially as moms, but as the primary caretaker, whatever gender you may be, you are so used to planning backwards, right? We have to be there at 3, which
Yeah.
means we have to leave at 2:40, which means everyone has to have gone to the bathroom at 2:30, and at 2:15 I need to start packing all the snacks and reminding them to get their shoes and socks on and all of that. And we do all of that planning,
But we don't
and
clue anyone else in.
yeah, we don't clue anyone else in, and it's so helpful to actually talk through it. And every once in a while, do it together on a whiteboard so that the
Yeah.
kids see, okay, so to make this happen, you actually have to think about all of these steps and you have to work backwards from what the ultimate goal is. And this is how you do it. And if you don't show them that and practice doing that with them, at some point, they're going to need to be able to do it on their own and they're going to be completely lost because no one took the time to actually show them. It's just like any other skill.
Yep.
Like take the time to show them and practice. And you don't have to do it every time because yes, it takes so much more time to do it, right? Like let's be realistic. It is so much faster for me to just figure it out and be like, okay, it's 2:15, everyone, like start doing this and that, um, but help, right? The
Yeah.
whole point of this episode is tangible, specific things you can do that actually help build these skills because they're essentially a muscle and you can build it and strengthen it, or you can just hope that somehow it miraculously gets bigger and stronger on its own. And to an extent, it will on its own, but we all know that if you exercise something properly, it's going to get stronger in the right kind of way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree.
Yeah. So this is something, the next one that I'm going to share is one I have not tried this. We did not need to do this, but I just saw it on social media and I was like, oh, this is an excellent example of a way to incorporate this with young kids. It's a super fun way, right? So for younger kiddos, I saw this video where they had gotten those little round touch, like push button lights, like you see at IKEA or
Yeah.
whatever. They're always saying like, oh, put them inside your closet or put it inside your, cabinet that you can't see inside very well. So they had those kind of lights. And above each light, they had a picture of what the kids needed to do to get ready for bed. And then they had another set that was what they needed to do to get out the door. So if you're in public school, it's extra important, right? Or daycare or something like that. But it could be important on co-op day or whatever.
Yeah.
And each one was a picture of like, so the nighttime was like taking a shower and there's one light under it. And then there's another picture, brush your teeth and there's a light under it. And there's, putting on your PJs and there's a light under it. And set your backpack by the front door and there's a light under it. And so in the evening, before it's time to start doing all of this stuff, the mom went through and turned all the lights on. And then the kid, each time they finish one, they go and tap it and touch off the light.
That's
And then
so
they can
fun.
yeah, it's fun. And it's a very visual, like, uh-oh, there's a light still on. I haven't done something I'm supposed to do before I go to bed, right? It's a super easy way. And then they just stick on the wall because they're battery operated. Like, you don't have to worry about any extra, like, a fun, easy way of building these skills, like from the ground up, right? Like, start early because it's only going to get harder, right? The stuff you have to do, the stuff you have to figure out and manage, it only gets harder. So start with these skills young.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I had one more that I wanted to talk about, right? And this kind of encompasses a lot of the things that we've talked about today. That idea of letting go of your expectations as the parent, getting creative about how you do things, and also supporting these skills in a way that they will be able to implement it later in life, right? And showing them that creative solutions to executive function challenges, it's okay. So in our house and in a lot of my friends' houses, you tell your kid to get dressed and they get dressed. And then you tell your kid it's time to leave and they go to the door and they grab their shoes and they're like, oh, I don't have socks. And you're like, well, I thought socks was part of getting dressed. Like it's clothing, it lives in the same dresser as everything else. And so you're trying to get out the door and they're standing at the door with their shoes and they're like, I don't have any socks. And you're like, well, you need to get socks, right? So now you're trying to get out the door and they go back into the room, they get their socks, they come back out, they sit down on the floor, they put their socks on, they stand back up, they realize that they want to sit back down to put their shoes on, they sit back down, they put their shoes on, they stand up and you're like, oh my God, we are so late. What is wrong with you? Why can you never remember to put your socks on? And your morning has started off super shit. Right?
Yeah.
Like this is not how anyone wants their morning to go. Like, or afternoon, whatever time you're trying to leave, right? It does not matter. At least in my house, it does not matter what time of day you're trying to leave. The socks are not on the feet, right? Like, and you know, you can keep fighting this. If you enjoy this power struggle every time you go to leave the house, by all means, go on with your bad self. But there are solutions, right? There are ways that you can do around it. Maybe you put a thing of socks by the door, right? You have a cabinet or a case where all of your shoes live, and you just have a little bin of socks there so that when they get to the door, it's like, don't forget your socks, and they're right there. So at least they're not trekking upstairs to their room and then coming back down, like the socks are there. It doesn't take quite so long. Or if the whole sock thing really, like, I don't know how it can take them so long to put on socks, but it always puts us 5 minutes behind schedule, and like, you just can't, like, okay, fine. What about putting the socks in the car? What about having a pair of sandals that they can slip on? They grab their shoes, you take them out to the car, and while you're driving and you're stuck in traffic doing whatever, your kid is putting on their socks and then they put on their tennis shoes. Yeah, they can do it as slow as they need and want. And yes, it does mean that now at the end of the day, you have to remind them or work on making sure they remember to bring their sandals in so that they have them for the next morning. But it's so much easier to do that at the end of the day when you're like, hey, don't forget to grab your sandals and your backpack and your water bottle, then it is like, we're gonna be late, move it, move it, move it, like it's as simple as like shifting things around. And it's so easy to be like, well, this is how it's supposed to be done, but does it have to be done that way? The vast majority of the time, like, the answer is no. You can get creative with your solutions. We all do. Companies do it all the time. They change things, they shift things to make it work better for them. We can too. We can make our little corporation actually
Run
more
smoothly.
efficient. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
And the other thing too is as much as we kind of talked about it at the very beginning, as much as we want to helicopter and be like, you have to put socks on before you put your shoes on. If you've got a kid who is like, no, I don't need socks today, I'm going to wear my tennis shoes and it's going to be fine. That might be the day to say, you know what? All right, give that a try. Let me know how that works out for you. I'm going to guess they're going to come home at the end of the day and be like, dude, my feet were sweaty and it was rubbing in the back and that was a bad idea. Like, I do actually really want socks with my sneakers, right? Like,
it's a safe way to quote unquote fail.
Exactly. This is
Yeah.
one of those perfect examples of like, give them the independence to fail safely so that they're like, oh, yeah, we have this a lot in our house where there will be times where I'm like, I've said it a million times, I've reminded you, and you know what? Now you want to do it this way? Like, go on with your bad self. And usually after the fact, he's like, I really should have listened to you. That's why you always tell me, that's why you always tell me to do this. I'm like, yeah, but lesson
We're
learned.
we're a pretty sarcastic family. That's kind of our love language around here. And so, it'll, like in our house, and my kids are older too, so in our house it would be like, oh man, if only somebody had tried to warn you, like, and then they're like, I know. So that
Yeah.
happens quite a bit.
Mhm.
All right. Well, you've got some exciting updates for us, Amanda. So let's jump in.
Recommended resources. Do you need more homeschool supplies? No. Are you going to want these anyway? Absolutely.
Yeah, pretty much. What do you have for us?
But with this specific podcast, right, we're talking about the importance of knowing your child and maybe shifting or changing your expectations. And so I was thinking about that, and it really made me think, how often do we think history has to be books? You read books or maybe watch documentaries or go to a museum, but even in the museum, it involves a ton of reading, these really dry descriptions of things. There's another solution, right? And it's one of the reasons that I'm hugely fond of the curriculum called History Quest. It's from Pandia Press. And it starts with kind of early civilization and goes up through American history. So sorry, it doesn't go outside of American history. You're not going to get current, like modern European history. But History Quest, they have audiobooks. So their entire textbook, as well as these weekly fun stories that are like a storybook related to the history textbook section, are in audiobook format. And you can do it with the teacher guide where you have suggestions of crafts and questions and copy work and things like that if you want. But if not, you can just order the audiobook version that comes with both the textbook and the fun storybook version of each lesson. And you can listen to it in your car. If you have a kiddo who needs to be able to move around, maybe you've got a kiddo like Meagan who likes to go jump on the trampoline, and that's the time that they're going to get their history in. Or maybe they like to bike and they're going to go out biking, but they want to listen, with one earbud in to make sure they're still safe. But this is a great way to shift your thinking. History doesn't have to be with a textbook, sitting down and looking at the map and, plotting through it. Maybe it's coming alive with audiobooks and storybooks that are literally, just these MP3 files that you download. So that's my recommended resource for the week. History Quest, you can actually do history specifically for elementary and middle school age kids through this great audiobook format. And you can extend it if you want with the teacher guide and the worksheets and the map work and all of those things. But you don't have to. You can learn a ton of great history that's literally a history textbook, but in audiobook form.
I like it. And then I'm guessing, because Amanda is very organized between us, that there will be a link to that in our
Yes.
description for today. So if you're interested, pop it. It will not be because of me. It will be because Amanda goes back to this document and puts it there for me so that when I upload it, it's there. So thank you.
Yes, there will be a link here in the show notes. And if you're listening to this later on, there will also be for sure a link in our Instagram. So I'll put it in the story, but that's only good for 24 hours, right? But there's a way that you can save highlight reels. And anytime I have recommended something, I will make sure that our story gets saved in the highlight reels. So you can go in there and click, and it'll always have a picture of the resource that I'm talking about. Generally speaking, a picture of my version of the resource because we use them ourselves, with a link that you can actually click on that'll take you right to the page that I'm talking about. Because I hate when people are like, oh, check this out. And then you Google it and you're like, but there are like 8 versions. Like, what one am I supposed to get? Like, I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to make your life easier, I promise.
Simplify these things, right? Exactly.
Right.
Very good. Well, we will end with our mantra for the day. And our mantra for today's episode is setting our kids up for success means giving them the tools to navigate life, not just smoothing out every bump in the road. After all, a little struggle today builds the resilience they'll need tomorrow. So it is that fine line of balancing giving them the tools that they need, but also letting them learn through experience. And it's a tough balancing act. We get it. We're doing the same thing. So thanks for tuning in today. We hope that you were able to take something away from this week's episode. We have our new book starting this week, The Danish Way of Parenting Teens or Raising Teens. There you go. Amanda's got it. And so thanks so much and happy homeschooling.
Yeah, have a great one.